Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Sarah, a volunteer moderator of MAVEN Project, and I welcome you to today's session on Direct Relief Series, Medical Spanish Speak My Culture Tips and Strategies to Better Equip You in Providing Culturally Appropriate and Sensitive Care to Your Latino Patients, a session from the partnership with MAVEN Project and Direct Relief. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Tamara Rios, CEO of Rios Associates. Dr. Rios was raised in both Acapulco, Guerrero, Mexico, and Tucson, Arizona, is bilingual and bicultural, and holds a bachelor's and a master's in psychology with a minor in Spanish, as well as a PhD in psychology and education. She has been teaching and coordinating programs with Rios Associates since 2000. Dr. Rios has served as a consultant to various hospitals and medical groups for over 15 years. In addition, she has collaborated with and served as a consultant to a number of international hospitals and medical groups in Mexico, Spain, and Peru. Dr. Rios, I will have you share your slides and feel free to begin. And actually, slides are already up, so you're all set to start.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate the warm welcome. Thank you all for joining in. It was so nice to have a quick little brief chat about weather, and I will actually address that in one of our cultural tips, how we can really warm the visit up before getting down to business. So before we get started, I did want to say an extra thank you for everything that you are doing for your Latino patients and joining in to learn more about the culture and how we can really improve and connect with our Latino patients in a way that really resonates from the cultural perspective. I have nothing to disclose, but I want to actually get right to it because I have so much information that I'm looking forward to sharing with everyone today. A little bit of context. So the courses that we present really are geared towards a very specific group of Latinos. So towards everything that I will share with you today is specific towards your Spanish-speaking patients that are coming from Spanish-speaking countries later in life who now live in the US. So again, we're born and raised in a Spanish-speaking country and have arrived to the US, usually as adults, and we're maybe struggling a little bit when it comes to the English language and the US culture. We might just need a little bit of help when it comes to that. So that said, a little bit of information here. There are 20 Spanish-speaking countries plus the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. That said, there are many regional differences, not just with the language, but also with the culture. So I always like to put in perspective, it's like the English we speak here in the US compared to the English perhaps in the UK or in New Zealand, Australia. We speak the same language, but there are some differences. The same applies with Spanish. So because there are so many Spanish-speaking countries, you will notice that there are a fair amount of regional differences. Also, when it comes to the culture, you might notice some of us are much more colorful and expressive and animated. And sometimes I've been told a little bit more on the dramatic end. And others, we might be more reserved and stoic. So I do want to point out that there are some recommendations that we give to try to connect with both of the Latinos in those categories. And of course, then there's those of us who have spent more time in the US and have picked up on the US culture. So let's continue on. I want to address some identity terms. So we have been hearing a lot of Hispanic, Latino, and more recently, the term Latinx. That said, I've had a lot of participants in our courses over the last few years ask, well, what is the correct identity term? Because I want to be respectful. I really want to make sure that I'm using the term that my patient feels most comfortable with. So it's interesting because all of these terms were actually developed here in the US. So they're not technically recognized terms that we use in Latin America. We tend to identify with the actual country that we're from, our country of origin. So for example, commonly, I would say soy Mexicana, I am Mexican, as opposed to soy Latina, I am Latina. However, now that many of us are now living in the US, we tend to identify a little bit more with Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx. So let's explore those terms. Again, those terms were developed here in the US. Hispanic and Latino are the terms that have been used the longest, and they have been used interchangeably. However, there is a subtle difference. Hispanic does refer to someone from a Spanish-speaking country. So we can't forget our friends in Spain, in Europe, and also our friends in Equatorial Guinea in Africa. So I know I always get the feedback, oh, wow, I didn't realize there's a Spanish-speaking country in Africa, and there is. So those are the two countries that we cannot forget. Now, when we're referring to Latino, it's easier to think of it more as geography, any country or territory in Latin America. Now, not all of those countries / territories speak Spanish. And I think we immediately think of Brazil, which is correct. But in addition to Brazil, there's Suriname, Guyana, and French Guiana, where Spanish is not spoken. So just something to keep in mind there and take note of. Now, I'm going to take us into a little bit of Spanish grammar, not to bore you guys, but Spanish, as pretty much all Romance languages, everything is gendered in the language. So I'm going to take a little page out of that book to explain Latina versus Latino and how we've gotten into Latinx. So Latina refers to a woman or a group of women. So usually when you see the A, that's what we're saying. So when we say Latina, again, it can be a woman or a group of women. Latino will refer to a man, a group of men, or a group of men and women. So according to the language, it includes everyone. Now, this is where Latinx has come into play because it's an excellent gender neutral term that's inclusive of everyone. So now we're getting rid of the O and the A, and we're just replacing it with the X, and that makes it inclusive of everyone of Latin American descent. So it's interesting to note it is a term that was actually developed here in the US. So many parts of Latin America, this is still a foreign term. It's not a recognized term. In fact, for many of your Latino patients or Hispanic patients living in the US, we might not even recognize the term either. I feel like I'm informing a lot of my family and friends that live here that have recently arrived, and actually even my aunt who's lived here for a couple decades, she had no clue what Latinx meant. So again, be patient with us. It is a term that even us Latinos are becoming comfortable with and familiar with. So I do want to point out, it is actually included in many of the English dictionaries. However, interestingly enough, not in the Royal Spanish Academy, which in Spanish is called La Real Academia Española, which many of you might wonder, well, what does that mean? Who are they? It's an institution based out of Spain, Madrid, actually, Spain, established in the 1700s with the idea to unify the over 500 million Spanish speakers in the world. And the idea is to have us Spanish speakers be able to refer back to, okay, what is technically the correct term? Because as we move on into other countries, we're exposed to other languages, and then we start to mix them, as we have here in the US with English and Spanish, and that's how we've come up with Spanglish, which is an interesting and wonderful language in itself. But the reality is one needs to understand both English and Spanish to be able to communicate in Spanglish. So the Royal Academy of Spain doesn't really accept that. So that said, the term Latinx, the term Latine, which is also being used more in Spanish-speaking countries, is not yet recognized by the Real Academia Española, because it's just considered not following the Spanish grammar and the language and so forth, not for any other reason. But I do point that out just because, you know, we also teach medical Spanish courses, and from the language perspective, it's not something that we're able to build into the language grammar and structures quite yet. But the important thing is we're having these conversations and the dialogues that are taking place. Okay, let's move along. Afro-Latino or Afro-Latinx. It's going to take you into a little bit of history, a little reminder. Back when the Spaniards came in and conquered Latin America, many of the indigenous groups became slaves and were either A, murdered off, or B, died because a lot of the diseases that were brought in from the Spaniards. So that led many Spaniards to bring in many from different countries of Africa as slaves. And that's where we have the African influence in Latino America, hence the Afro-Latino or Afro-Latinx. Chicano, Chicana is a chosen identity for those of us that are of Mexican descent. So in other words, if our parents or grandparents or great-great-great-great-great-parents are Mexicanos, Mexicans, yet we were born and raised here in the US. So Finally, I'm going to close with what I started off with. Many of us that are born and raised in Latin America, we often will not use any of these terms and just actually refer to the country of origin. For example, I am from Acapulco, Mexico. So I usually say, soy mexicana. I am Mexican. And again, soy cubana, colombiana, peruana, etc. So at the end of the day, it is a personal choice. But I did want to address these terms because we're noticing them, we're hearing them more and more in the news and in podcasts and just among colleagues and so forth. So hopefully I've answered some questions there. I want to now get right to the cultural values. These are, again, very common cultural values in the traditional Latino culture. Now, many of us are now living here in the US, and many of us are living in multi-generational households where you might have some Latinos that are born and raised here in the US, others are not, have just recently arrived. So a good mixture within the family unit. So that can change the dynamics and views. But at the end of the day, usually these traditional values will continue down the line to some degree. But just a little reminder, a lot of what I'll be sharing with you today is specific to your traditional Latino culture, okay? So let's take a look. Simpatía. This refers to kindness, those common courtesies, those pleasantries, the warm, welcoming environment that we want to be able to offer our patients when patients are coming in feeling not well, and obviously other layers of concerns there, which can be stress, again, from the cultural perspective, stress due to the language barrier, the cultural barrier, for some, the immigration concerns too, in terms of their status. So there's a lot of additional stressors that your Latino patient might be coming in to the visit with. So that said, it's even more important to really welcome us in with that warm, in a sense, upbeat tone of voice. And the upbeat tone of voice is not that, oh, I'm excited, I'm happy you're sick, or not. Well, it's on the contrary, it's, I'm looking forward to really helping you. I want to help you get better. So again, we want to be able to offer that in that first interaction. We really place a lot of value on just that harmony. So we don't want to disrupt that, which is often why many Latinos will try to agree with our healthcare providers to maintain that harmony. We don't want to question anything that you might ask us because we don't want to come across as, oh, we're questioning your credibility. So oftentimes we will politely just nod and say, oh, see, yes, of course. Again, not everyone, but many. We want to maintain that harmony. Now, moving on to the next value of respeto. It sounds like respect, and that is indeed what it is. And it's really based primarily on an individual's age, gender, and social position, which for today's presentation, I just want to spend a little bit more time on the social position for you all, healthcare providers. So you are actually, you're looked at as an authority figure. We highly regard you. There's a great deal of respect. And growing up in Latin America, one is taught to not question anyone in an authority figure because that is viewed as being disrespectful. So many of us often will not ask questions. So that's something to keep in mind. We want to try to be a little bit extra just focused in on encouraging those questions with our Latino patients. So I point that out because rather than maybe just asking, do you have any questions or what questions do you have, maybe adding in a little bit more Latino style. Well, what questions, concerns, worries do you have? Is there anything at all that I can clarify for you? Because then that lets us know that it's okay to ask a question. And you're also giving us that respect to open up the door that, yeah, you can actually voice your opinion. You can let me know. That's what I'm here for. So again, it goes both ways. Oftentimes with healthcare providers, we don't want to trouble you. So you might notice, well, then at the end of the visit, after having told you we don't have any questions, then we're going to go ask your medical assistant or someone else that we might feel just a little bit more comfortable in terms of asking. So again, encourage. We want to make a little bit more of an effort to encourage those questions from our Latino patients. Okay, we're going to move on to personalismo. And it's just what it sounds like. Think of personal, offering that personal touch. So it's what we call in English, I feel like we can refer to it more as formal friendliness. So we want to maintain that friendly, warm, welcoming, upbeat tone of voice, but still the formality. So what does that mean? Usually sticking to the last name. So Mr. Señor, Mrs. Señora, which we'll take a look at in a moment. Having, again, the politeness, the common courtesies, the pleasantries, all of that will allow us to build rapport, to build trust. And that's what in Spanish is called confianza. That will allow everything else to move a bit more seamlessly. What does that mean? It means we're going to feel more comfortable to open up with you when it comes to our concerns, with much personal information that we might be a little bit concerned with divulging. With your wonderful recommendations, we'll feel comfortable and enough to be able to actually follow through with those great recommendations that you give us. So trust is really going to be what we want to work towards achieving with our patients. Confianza, again, is what it's called. And that is, again, based more on those personal interactions. So another interesting point with Latinos, we really do tend to trust individuals far more than institutions. So this is a great opportunity for you to connect with your Latino patient, not just to build that rapport with your patient, but you're also helping your fellow colleagues and your clinic and your hospital. You are representing the medical field. So by allowing us to leave with a positive experience, you're letting us know that that is possible. Because for so many Latinos, especially for more from rural areas in Latin America, this might actually be our first interaction with a healthcare provider. So we're coming in with a lot of concerns and fears. Many of us have only heard some negative experiences that maybe our family members or friends or neighbors might have had. So let us know that we can actually have a good, positive experience, and that's going to encourage us to continue on with the follow-up appointments, with the treatment plan, with anything else that you are recommending. So really think about that. It's not just you and your patient. You're doing so much more moving forward. Okay, another interesting point is we really base everything on the personal interaction. So what does that mean? Try to connect with us on a human-to-human level. So use our names often. That's one thing we really appreciate in our culture. The other area I want to encourage, share a little bit of personal information about you, your family, whatever it is you might feel comfortable doing. So again, it might be something like, oh, I understand my sister also was just diagnosed with diabetes, or gosh, the weather, it's so cold outside, or something that might be happening in your community, an event, school is starting, school is ending, the holidays. Try to connect with us human to human. I know you have a very limited amount of time, but just those 2 minutes will help us feel more relaxed. Our guard will come down and we'll feel more inclined to actually share very personal information with you, which we might not share otherwise. So something to keep in mind. It is absolutely expected to have this type of communication of politeness and warmth. It is standard in all interactions. So it can be quite jarring for the Latino to just have that get down to business approach. It is viewed as a bit off-putting. So within your comfort zone, I feel like it's all about meeting in the middle. I certainly don't want to have you guys change everything, but maybe there's somewhere we can meet in the middle, and that's what it's all about. So again, if we can really build a little bit more on that friendly encounter, just that extra minute or two before the get down to business approach, we will definitely feel more comfortable with you, and then follow through with all the wonderful suggestions that you'll be giving us. If that doesn't happen, unfortunately, we might not feel comfortable enough to share that information with you and really to move forward with your recommendations. We might just politely nod and say yes. And that's another cultural point. Just because we nod and say yes, it does not mean that we agree with you. It does not mean that we're going to follow through with what you're recommending. It simply means I'm being respectful and I'm listening to what you're saying. So it's really important to be able to check in with your Latino patient, ask what our perspective is, elicit our perspective, and not just our perspective, elicit our family's perspective, which is what leads us into the next cultural value of familismo. And it is what it is. It sounds like family. That is exactly what it is. I feel like we can all agree family is important in all cultures. But I did want to point out, just kind of highlight a few areas that might be slightly different. So in the Latino culture, we highly regard our elder family members. So particularly the parents, the grandparents, the older aunties and the uncles. We do not distinguish between immediate and extended family. There are no terms for that in Spanish. Everyone is family, even non-blood related, friends, unrelated. That's family. So this is important. Why? Because we provide reciprocity. Everyone comes together in life's difficult moments and just in major life decisions, such as healthcare decisions. So I point this out because for many Latinos, we will be going back and discussing everything with our family members. And we will often make the decision as a family. So it's so important to go in to your visit with your Latino patient, knowing that oftentimes it's your patient and the family. It's a package deal when it comes to Latinos. That's just the way it works. And even if your Latino patient does not have family here in the city where they are or the state where they are, Latinos, we are actively involved in each other's lives through the WhatsApp chat group. There are family chat groups where everyone is constantly, daily chiming in with what's going on in one's life. Everyone is involved regardless of location, and especially when it comes to healthcare. So always, always ask about what your patient's family thinks about things, because chances are they're probably going to be leaning towards, gravitating towards doing what the family is wanting to. So good to also ask them to join in on the visit next time if they are around. One last thing I do want to point out when it comes to familismo is oftentimes the needs and the concerns of the family will supersede the needs of the actual individual. So what does that mean? We're very quick to self-sacrifice. So if it's, gosh, I don't know if I can purchase this medicine or purchase, let's say, the insulin because I need to send money back home to my family. So that's one other area that we feel the responsibility, the commitment, the obligation to not just provide for our family here in the US, but our family in our home country. And again, it doesn't mean their immediate family, it can be extended family. Family always comes together. So it is very natural in the Latino culture to self-sacrifice for the benefit of the whole family. So there's a lot of reasons why maybe your patient is not taking the medicine, why they're not going to follow-up visits. We want to be sure to ask why, and a lot of it often will be because of obligations to the family. Okay, I want to take us to the last value here of fatalismo. It sounds like fatalism, and that's what it is. It's a belief that some health issues are simply beyond human control, that there's little that we can do to alter fate. It is what it is, right? It's predetermined. It is simply inevitable. So for many Latinos, this can lead to passivity and, simply not wanting to participate in preventative visits or screenings, and simply just not complying with a lot of the treatment plans, because the idea is, well, it is what it is. This is the cross that I have to bear. These were the cards that were, given. So it's one of those areas that we still want to be respectful. We want to acknowledge that, but maybe ask for permission to come in and share what actually is available now in today's day and time. We can now do this. We now have these options. But again, we want to come in and ask permission if we're able to share. And a nice way to do that is offering that personal touch. So what does that mean? An example would be, telling, say, your patient, Mr. Señor Gomez, I just had this conversation with my cousin who also was just recently diagnosed with diabetes. And we had a lot of conversations about this. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to be able to share some of the recommendations that we talked about, because it's the same way I want to see my cousin do. I would love to see my patients and you do well as well. So it's a nice way to introduce a little bit of the personal touch, right? A little bit of the respect, a little bit of the fatalismo. So it all ties in together. Okay, I want to now take us to some common foods and beverages that we will eat in the Latino culture. Again, not all Latinos, but many of the traditional Latinos, we continue along with these foods and beverages even here in the US. So rice and beans are staple. We have to be mindful that a big pot of rice and beans will last much longer and is much filling than, a salad or vegetables. And we can't forget that many Latinos, again, we're living in multi-generational households. So there are a lot of family members to cook for and to provide and feed. So we have to be practical about that. In many parts of Latin America, again, rice and beans it's accessible, it's easy, it's less expensive. Vegetables are not as commonly grown in so many parts of Latin America. They're brought in from other countries, so it becomes more expensive. So something to keep in mind there. Often we cook with lard, a lot of delicious fried food, not the healthiest, but a lot of the fried food, the starchy food. Many of you guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the tortillas. So the tortillas actually originated from Mexico. And of course, now we'll see them internationally. But a little bit of background: in the north of Mexico, tortillas are made often out of harina, which is flour, just because that's what's easily grown there. And in the south of Mexico, where I'm from, they're made out of maize, corn, because that's what's easily available there. But now, we see a little bit of everything everywhere. Arepas are more common in South America, particularly Colombia and Venezuela. A lot of that very similar but thicker, and they're made out of corn flour. Same thing with pupusas, which is very specific to El Salvador. A lot of these you can add on toppings or fillings, such as beans, different types of meats, some veggies, and cheese and so forth. Empanadas were brought in from the Spaniards, so we can find that in all of Latin America. And of course, at this point, at an international level, but they're both savory and sweet. And then the tamales, again, specific to more Mexico, Central America, but now, available internationally. But they're made in the corn husks, or the actual plant-based leaves there. So anyways, all delicious, but still we need to be mindful, probably not the healthiest to eat all day, every day, which some of us will do. We eat a lot of red meat, high carbs, comida chatarra. If I have any Spanish speakers or those of you that are wanting to learn a little bit more Spanish, comida chatarra, junk food. Also, some will use as fast food, which now that we're living in the US, it is. It's a bit more common. It's less expensive. It's one thing that we can access much easier. So it's something definitely worth addressing. Desserts are common after every single meal. I did not realize this until I moved to the US, that not everyone in the US has a dessert after every single meal, and also is snacks. So growing up for many Latinos, it's something sweet after every single meal 3 times a day, and also snacking on. So there's a lot of sugar there. Pan dulce is one of those sweet foods that we like. Pan is bread, dulce is sweet. So think of like the pastries. Often for Latinos, we will have that for breakfast with a café con leche, coffee and milk. Or for dinner as a snack right before bedtime. So again, probably not the healthiest, but they sure are tasty. I have a little picture of them in the corner you might take a look at. So as we can see here, there's a lot of high sugar content in food and also in beverages. So we're drinking a lot of soda, a lot of juice. One particular beverage, which in theory is healthy, but then the issue with the sugar becomes a problem. So aguas frescas, frescas mean fresh. And indeed, it is. You can take any fruit, any whole fruit, you blend it in the blender with water, and you have your agua fresca, which is great, but then we start pouring in all the sugar, and that's where it becomes an issue. So you can make it out of anything. It can be out of strawberries. It can be out of a melon or watermelon, anything, lime. But the problem there is the amount of sugar. So that might be a conversation, maybe, removing the sugar, or maybe having a whole fruit instead of the agua fresca. Okay, we have a lot of high coffee intake. So here's one thing. We start drinking coffee very young at age. We give the kiddos café con leche at a very young age. Of course, more milk than coffee, but it is something that we start drinking at a very young age, all day, all night. So there's no cutoff time for Latinos. It's just a little cafecito, a little coffee in the morning, in the afternoon, for a little snack, and then also at bedtime, as I'd mentioned before, with the pan dulce. A lot of whole milk and condensed milk. There are many Latinos that we grew up in more rural areas. So we have a lot of the powdered milk. Again, we continue on with these when we come to the US. One area I do want to really emphasize is the low water intake. So we have to be mindful that in many parts of Latin America, water is a luxury. It is not safe to drink. It is not clean. So for so many, it is expensive to purchase filtered water. So what does that mean? Many of us are just hydrating on sodas and juices. So fast forward, we come here to the US. Well, we don't know otherwise. We think it's the same here. So here's a great opportunity to let your Latino patients know the water is good to drink. It's safe to drink. And in fact, it's important to drink. So maybe swap one soda or one juice for one glass of water and kind of ease our way into the water intake. And you might get the response of, oh, it doesn't have any flavor, no tiene sabor. You can nip it in the bud and just have us squeeze some lime in to give it some flavor. By the way, Latinos, we really enjoy lime over lemon. It's just what's common in our foods and beverages. Lime, not lemon. So if you're going to encourage something, make sure it's the lime. Okay, let's talk about some barriers. I do want to hone in on diabetes, just because, so many Latinos do have diabetes. Again, a lot of this can be applied with other diseases and scenarios. But for today, I just want to focus in on that. So let's take a look. Preventative care, it is a foreign concept for many Latinos because growing up in Latin America, you pretty much just go see your healthcare provider when you're sick, and to the point where it's interfering with your daily activities. So for so many Latinos, we don't wait a few days. We can be waiting weeks, months, or even years. That's why it's so important to ask, well, not how many days, but just for how long, generally speaking, right? Because for many of us, it actually can be months, or again, even years. So to the point where it interferes with daily activities, that means for Latinos, that means work, interfering with work, or interfering with caring for the family. Remember, a lot of us are living in multi-generational households. There are the elderly family members that we're caring for in addition to the children. So if that becomes an issue, that's when we go and seek out medical help. Now, it's important to know many of us might have tried a number of different things along the way. We've exhausted all measures, then we go see you. So such as we might be taking an antibiotic, a leftover antibiotic. With Latinos, we love to share our medicines, which is exactly what you do not want us to do. So definitely ask about that. We're big on herbs and teas. We might be seeing some of the natural healers. So usually we exhaust all those measures and then we go see you. So it's such something to really ask, what have we tried? Who have we seen? Not just healthcare providers, but maybe some of the natural healers, which I'll briefly address a little bit later in the presentation. Committing to appointments. That's something with Latinos. Time is just more flexible. It is not a priority. It's not meant with disrespect to show up late or to not show up. But it is important to gently let us know that the time is important and to try to be sure to show up on time. You might even want to let us know to show up 30 minutes early, just in case. But I do want to point out from the cultural perspective, time is just more flexible. And then there's other layers to this as well, where it's maybe we don't have a car. We got to take 2 to 3 buses. And maybe our job will not allow us to do that. They told us we could, but now we can't. So there's so many layers. It's important to really find out what's going on in terms of that. Okay, we talked about the concept of fatalism, the belief that's predetermined. That's, again, another area where we can at least acknowledge, but also offer the opportunity to share some new information. If your patient's open, do it and see what works and kind of meet in the middle, right? Now, interesting, when we're talking about diabetes, there is among many Latinos this belief that a stressful event is the onset of diabetes, whether that was a car accident, a divorce in the family, a death in the family. Again, something that caused the stress is what the onset of the diabetes was. So it's one of those areas to maybe just inquire, what does your patient think caused this? So you'll find out so much more through asking those questions. There's a lot of fear of insulin, as well as other medications, but particularly insulin when it comes to diabetes care. So many of us Latinos, since we're actively involved in our families' lives, and it's not just the immediate family, it's the entire family, and we have a lot of family members, a lot of friends, a lot of neighbors. So we all know that one person who was diagnosed with diabetes, they were started on insulin, and then all of a sudden they had a leg amputated or they went blind without realizing what happened in between. So we just hear these stories, and then all of a sudden it's, I'm not gonna start the insulin because my neighbor ended up doing that and look what happened to him. So again, it's definitely worth asking, well, what do you think about it, Mr. Gomez? Tell me. And there's a lot of storytelling in the Latino culture. That's how we love to communicate. So we appreciate that. You can use that as well with us. So what works well with Latinos in terms of information that's well received, as opposed to studies indicate or research has shown that kind of goes in one ear and out the other with Latinos. But if you tell us something like, your patients, I've seen with my patients, or we've noticed here at the clinic that, or, in my family, I have a family member that is also doing this and is taking insulin, and it has really improved his or her life. So again, we hear these personal stories. We want the storytelling. We want to sit down and feel like we're having a cup of coffee with you, un café cafecito? I know that can be challenging to really try to understand based on US and how we're interacting. You're like, I got to get through all of my patients. I wish I could sit down and have a cup of coffee with my Latino patient, but I just don't have the time. But imagine as if you were, because surprisingly, in many parts of Latin America, that is actually how it does work. Many patients are brought into the clinic and offered a cup of cafecito, a little cup of coffee. We're put at ease. I know you would love to be able to offer that, but it's just not the way it's set up here in the US. But if you can just try to give a little glimpse of that, right? Just through that storytelling, putting us at ease, the pleasantries, etc. Okay, another concern for many Latinos, fear of burdening family with changed diet. Why does my family have to suffer because of me? So we're willing again to do the self-sacrifice. Remember, we looked at the value of familismo. That's going to be a concern. We always are reflecting on how what is happening to us is going to impact our family for good or bad, and we make our decision often based on that, and it's usually for the benefit of the family. So it's something to really address with your Latino patients. Language barriers, obvious barriers. One thing I do want to point out, sometimes, and this even happens to the, those of us that are bilingual, sometimes because we're so used to communicating in English, we've heard something in English, even for those of us that are bilingual, we might fall into that literal translation, which can be a problem because sometimes things get lost in translation. There are some words that simply don't exist in another language. So terms like refill, yes, we have come up with some terms in Spanish here in the US for refill, yet in Latin America, they don't exist because the concept doesn't exist. OTC, over the counter, the term doesn't exist in Latin America because so much of the medication is available over the counter. So again, a lot of things are better to explain. So that's something just to keep in mind. And that kind of falls into the category of the cultural barriers as well. So cultural barriers, we have easy ways to connect with Latino patients from the cultural perspective. So even if you're not as comfortable with your language proficiency, we can still connect with the culture. And that's what I'm going to share with you coming up. Okay, limited financial resources. That is a concern because, again, for so many Latinos, it is the commitment, the responsibility we feel to have to provide not just for our families here, but for our families back home. So again, we might have to work with our finances in a different way because we have to, again, be available for all of our family members. Immigration status, that is a real concern for so many. That is a real fear for so many. Even if your patient does not have that concern because they might not have to worry about that, but they might have a family member living with them in their household that it is a concern for. So with Latinos, whatever happens to a family member, it's as if it's happening to us. And we take that fear, we take that concern seriously. So that can really impact whether we're going to go seek our medical care. Is it okay? Are they going to ask me any personal questions? I don't want to get my family member in any problems. I don't want to have any problems. So that can really play a role in one's care. Emotional stress, depression, and other fears. Again, remember, there are many Latinos. I mean, if we go back all the way to the 80s, many of you might recall the civil wars in Central America. So many were fleeing horrific, violent scenarios where family members were murdered in front of them, where there was sexual aggression. And then the migration process as well is a very scary, violent avenue to take, and then coming to a country where you don't speak the language and the culture. So again, there's a lot of layers of stress that many of your Latinos are going through, not just from the 80s, but now as well. So something just to keep in mind and make note of. The other area too is a lot might be psychosomatic. We want to explore those options as well. Okay, I want to get into some sensitivity tips. Okay, so speak some Spanish, even if it's just a buenos dias. A little bit goes a long way. So I'm going to give you some Spanish phrases here just to get us started off with. So I know I can't hear you guys, but repeat after me. Repitan por favor. Buenos dias. That's your good morning. Buenas tardes, that's your good afternoon. Buenas noches, that is your good evening. And if you want one phrase to take you through the entire day, you can just say buen dia, and I have typed it in the chat box for you guys, and that is just good day. You don't have to worry about, is it morning? Is it now afternoon? Do I need to switch? Don't worry about it. Buen dia takes you the whole day. Okay, let's move on. Your introduction, soy el doctor Jones, or for your female, soy la doctora Jones, because remember, we have to be mindful of the gender changes again. It's a Romance language. Mucho gusto, nice to meet you. ¿Cómo está? How are you? And I want to add in one more. We can't forget the family. ¿Cómo está su familia? How is your family? Which I'm including in the chat box there, okay? So this is really a good way to just get the conversation started. A little bit goes a long way. So within your comfort zone, even if it's just buenos dias, perfect. That is great. But if you can add in a little bit more, it signals that you truly do care and you're trying to help. Okay, how can we build that trust? Remember in Spanish, confianza, invest in the beginning. This is the opportunity to build rapport, get that strong relationship going. So what does that mean? Use the formal address. So we talked about the formal friendliness and simpatía, right? So señor, Mr., señora, Mrs., ask how we want to be referred to as. Usually, if we think about respeto, respect, usually traditional Latinos do appreciate being referred to by their last name. But you can always ask, right? ¿Qué prefiere? What do you prefer? Señora Gomez or Maria? Once you've established how we want to be referred to, ask if you're not quite sure how to pronounce some of our names, ask us. It just shows that you care, you're interested. I know many people will always ask, because I have a very long name. It's Tamara Rios Woman, which no one can ever pronounce. So I just go by Tamara Rios to keep it simple. But I do appreciate when people ask, is it Tamara? Is it Tamara? Tamara? So again, it just shows you care. Once you've established how we want to be referred to, use our name often. That gives that nice personal touch, the personalismo that we talked about before, especially when you want to capture our attention. Because for so many Latinos, we're not accustomed to so much wonderful, detailed information. In many parts of Latin America, it's still very much the paternalistic approach, where it's the healthcare provider saying, you know, you have this, take this, let it call back if you don't feel better. But we don't have a lot of information to take with, and that and then in combination, excuse me, with it's rude to question an authority figure. We don't want to question you, so we do leave with very limited information in many parts of Latin America. So fast forward to here, where we're provided with a lot of wonderful information, but it's a lot of detailed information, and we're not used to it, and it can feel very overwhelming. So a great way to capture our attention and just kind of draw us in where we might not start drifting into other thoughts is just, Señora Gómez, esto es muy importante, you know, it's really important, and it kind of gives me the heads up with, okay, I need to pay attention and focus. Body language and tone of voice, they are easy tools that we have available. Body language, what does it mean? It means the smile. Although, you know, many of us might be putting the mask back on because of, you know, we're getting into the respiratory virus season, you can still show through the mask with that. The soft eye contact, you know, whether we're doing the handshake or not, you can wave, you can place your hands to your heart, you can lean forward, you can place a nice soft touch on your patient's shoulder. All of that signals you care. Tone of voice, that warm, welcoming, upbeat tone of voice that I shared with you earlier on when we were talking about simpatía. Now, one thing that's important is that more serious monotone voice is a little bit jarring. It's a bit off-putting for many Latinos because it starts to cause questions in our mind. Is this going to be bad news that they're going to share with me? Do they not like me? Are they like rushing and need to get somewhere else where, okay, we can't even have a conversation? So there's a lot of like nervousness once we start hearing the serious monotone voice. So again, within your comfort zone, again, meeting in the middle, you know, maybe you can give that a try. Okay, with Latinos, know what we like to eat. Know what some of those traditional foods are for us on an individual patient-to-patient level. Because again, just because I'm Mexicana doesn't mean I'm going to be eating tamales or tortillas. Maybe I'm married to someone from a different culture and I have started gravitating more towards those types of foods, or just US foods. So it's important to just get a sense. It's also equally important to ask, who's preparing the meals at home? Who's cooking? Because maybe it's not your patient. Maybe they're juggling 2 to 3 jobs and it's abuelita, grandma, which again, that then causes a bit of an issue because remember, respeto, and it's an elderly family member. We don't want to go against our abuelita. Here she works so hard all day to cook this delicious meal. How can I say no to her? So that's where it's important to determine who is doing the cooking, the food preparation, maybe have them join in on the next visit if possible. One last thing as we wrap up the food situation, know that for so many Latinos, and again, to cross-cultural degree, Food is more than just food. It is how we show our love and appreciation. It almost becomes a trophy or I forgot the word in English, premio. Si alguien habla español, premio, a prize. Sorry, I sometimes I get stuck in my Spanish. It doesn't come out as easily in English. It becomes a prize. So if you do well and you get good grades in school, I'll make you a cake today. Or my husband or my wife worked, 2 jobs in the heat of Arizona. I'm going to make their favorite meal and have, 2 bottles of beer or whatever that's ready. It might not be the healthiest, but we do it in so much love because we want to be able to share that with them. So acknowledge that there's so much history and memories tied into a lot of these meals that we're making that were shared to us by our parents, our grandparents, our aunties. So it goes far beyond food. We want to just acknowledge that. Okay. Keep it simple. When we're talking about that, it means when we're giving the examples, just go in more detail beyond carbs, give specific examples, go beyond just fiber, give specific examples that would be specific to the Latino culture, right? So for example, we love nopales, nopalitos, which is like the cactus type of food. It is healthy, it's very good. We love the squash. So if you can find certain foods that you already know we like and that are healthy, it won't feel so overwhelming. Provide fotonovelas. Now, I know we don't have a lot of that in the US. Certain groups do, certain don't. But novelas, many of you might identify with soap operas. Fotonovelas are like the photo versions. So it's similar to, just to put in perspective, like a comic book. It is a staple growing up in all of Latin America. So what it is we are able to tell a story based on pictures or drawings. So we convey certain messages such as health messages, social justice messages in a way that is available for everyone to understand regardless of literacy level. So it's a great way to really convey important messaging related to health and of course social justice. I have a few that I'll be sharing with you at the end of the PowerPoint slide. I know many places in the US do not offer that, but a great way to really work with us Latinos with the after visit summaries, because incidentally, we do not have after visit summaries or discharge instructions in many parts of Latin America. So we're not accustomed to receiving that. So it can feel very overwhelming to be sorting through several pages of black and white print. Highlight the salient parts. That will help guide us. Something as simple as that. Highlight those important areas. Explain the benefits of healthy eating or exercising or taking the medicine for the entire family. There's going to be a much better result if you let us know how it will impact the entire family. We will respond much better than if it's just, something that I should do as an individual. Again, we talked about the water. I can't encourage that enough. Encourage us to drink more water. So many of us just don't because we think it's not safe to drink. Okay, we talked about making it conversational. It's exactly what you want to do. So an example, if we're talking about your patient that has diabetes, ask them what they think about it, elicit their perspective, elicit their family's perspective, because it will actually divulge a lot of information as to maybe where our fears are, where our concerns are, etc., where the challenges lie. And if you feel comfortable, share a personal story from yourself, your family, a friend, a neighbor, or maybe just patients in general. I have found with my patients that have diabetes, they actually do well with fill in the blank, right? We want to have more of a conversational story type interaction. Okay. Inquire about alternative treatments. Remember, I mentioned before we see you, we often will try some leftover medications, some herbs, some teas, some home remedies, and often we will visit our natural healers. A few to name are curanderos, santeros, espiritistas, hierberos, or several other ones. We also have sobadores, we have hueseros, etc., shamans. But at any rate, I do really want to point out, just because we're now here in the US, because I've gotten a lot of feedback with, oh, I'm not worried about that because, we're in the US and they're probably not here. They are. We just don't speak of it. It's not often advertised. It's word of mouth out of someone's house. So ask, who are we seeing? What have we tried, in a very nonchalant way? Because that way we're not going to be concerned with, oh no, are they going to judge me or frown upon? If you ask in a very nonchalant, open way, like, oh, have you seen any other healthcare providers or, natural healers like curanderos? ask, because in that way, chances are we're taking a lot of the herbs and the teas, because that's often what is provided. And specific foods such as nopal, which I had mentioned before, the cactus, and cinnamon for medicinal purposes. Address what questions and concerns, now that we're on the topic of medications, that we have just in general, because then that opens up the dialogue, right? And you'll be able to really get down to what's going on as to why we're not taking our medication, if that's the case. Okay, make exercise fun, uncomplicated, and accessible. What does that mean? Add on with the familia, con la familia. Cannot emphasize that enough. So as opposed to, for many Latinos, we think, oh gosh, I need to think about how this is going to affect my family. I never see them anyways. I already have 2 to 3 jobs. I'm not going to go exercise. I want to spend time with my family. Or I'm not going to spend money in a gym. Or I already exercise with all the heavy lifting I'm doing in construction or in this type of position that I have. Make it fun. So maybe in that multi-generational household, encourage the family to, okay, have each family member put on their favorite song and have like a fun dance off. Or after dinner, walk around the neighborhood with the family, or a park or the mall, or somewhere that they feel safe and comfortable doing so. Playing soccer. Not all Latinos, but many of us, we love our soccer. We love football. Have the whole family get out there and play with the kiddos. Simple things we don't think about. Park the car at the end of the parking lot. You can also prevent your car from getting dinged that way. Just an extra bonus to throw in there. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. Little things that we just don't think about that make a difference. Okay, encourage personal responsibility. So when we want to have that warm, upbeat tone of voice. We want to use our patient's name often. Remember, we're bringing in all of those values that we talked about. And again, gently remind and encourage us that there are options nowadays. So although you still recognize, remember, fatalism, fatalismo, this is a great opportunity to chime in and let us know what options are now available. And when you go through all of those, great way to then check in at the end and just ask, what do you think you might consider doing now with maybe some of the exercises or the foods? And if we don't answer, or we're just have a blank look, it's okay. Please note that in many parts of Latin America, it's not encouraged to really participate. So we don't actively become involved in our care. We just kind of sit back and wait for you to tell us what to do. I mean, you went to, medical school. You guys are clearly the knowledgeable ones. So it is kind of the idea that the traditional Latino patient has is, well, you're just going to tell me what to do. But wait a minute, I need to actually be involved. So encourage us, be patient with us. If you see that we don't have an answer, that's okay. Let us know. When I was diagnosed with diabetes, or when my cousin or when my patients were, it was common to really not quite know yet what to do. And some of the things we talked about were fill in the blank with examples, maybe walking around the neighborhood, swimming, doing some yard work together as a family. That's where you can give us some examples, because we might not know. And then just check in with us, elicit our opinion, our perspective, and the families as well. When we do follow through with something, even if it's the smallest, really show that enthusiasm and that excitement with our name. Señora Gomez, excelente. That is excellent. That is wonderful. Again, upbeat tone of voice, because that's going to keep us motivated to move forward. Okay, suggest the use of the family and friends to support. Usually that's not an issue because the family's already there. But be mindful that a lot of the decision-making is made as a family unit. So it is so important to really kind of sort through what the family is thinking about and how they play a role, remember, with the meal preparation and so forth. Okay, how can we invest in the end? We learned how to invest in the beginning. Offering those culturally sensitive tips. So again, at the end of the visit, acknowledge that you covered a lot of information in a short period of time, and ask if you are able to explain everything clearly. So you want to take on that burden. You want to remove the burden off the patient, where ordinarily we might ask, well, did that make sense to you? Was that clear? Ask if you were able to explain it in a clear manner. Encourage those questions, concerns, the worries. Take a little moment to even sprinkle in some tips on preventative care. This might be the only opportunity that we have to learn about the preventative care. And again, encourage that family involvement. Elicit your patient's perspective and their family's perspective. And we're going to revisit the body language and tone of voice. Remember that warm, welcoming tone of voice. You want to use that at the end too. The waves, the handshaking, or just placing your hands to your heart, whatever you feel comfortable with, but taking that extra time to really say the goodbye. And 2 important areas culturally: thanking your Latino patient for trusting you with their healthcare, because they could have gone somewhere else. So you really want to make sure that we come back. So that simple little phrase really goes a long way. And sending regards to the family, even if you don't know them, you're still signaling, I get the importance of family. Okay, let's take a little bit of time to go through the Spanish, right? The goodbyes. If you can use any of these, please try to memorize them or use them if you're already familiar with them. Repeat after me. Repitan. Cuídese. That is take care. Que le vaya bien. May it go well for you. Gracias por su confianza. Thank you for your trust. And saludos a la familia. Greetings or regards to the family. There are many different ways you can say goodbye in Spanish. If I have my Spanish speakers here, we know that. But these are ones that are commonly used in Latin America in the healthcare setting, because not only you're saying goodbye, you're wishing them well. Okay, a couple things. I know I'm running a few minutes behind, Latino style, with my circular way of communicating, but this is how we do it. I want to just get through the naming conventions. And then one more thing. So generally speaking, we have 2 first names and 2 last names. This is pretty traditional. So usually of the 2 last names, it's the father's last name and then the mother's last name. And that's usually the way it will continue down the line. The only persons that name will change will be a woman's last name. The man's name does not change from a traditional perspective. So as an example, we have Juan Carlos Gómez Pérez. Gómez, father's last name. Pérez, mother's last name. So he will be filed under Mr. Gómez in Latin America. He will be referred to as Señor Gómez, right? Mariana Lara Ruiz, Lara, father's last name, Ruiz, mother's last name, same thing. She will be filed under Señorita Lara, and then she'll be referred to as Señorita Lara. Now let's assume they get married, right? Juan Carlos and Maria. So now this is where the change takes place. The woman will now take on her husband's last name instead of the mother's last name. So it'll be Mariana Lara, father's last name, of, and then the husband's father's last name, Gómez. So she will be Señora Gómez. She'll be filed under Gómez and referred to as Gómez, because now we have Señor y Señora Gómez, Mr. and Mrs. Gómez. Now, if the kiddos come into the picture, not always, but many times we do like to name after ourselves, the parents. So just like Juan will have little Juanito, Juan Cristobal, father's last name Gómez, mother's last name Lara, right? So father, mother, father, mother. Same thing with little Maria Clara, father's last name Gómez, mother's last name Lara. So keep that in mind as you kind of look at the full picture. Now, times are changing, but if, say, for example, Juan Carlos were to pass away, God forbid, Maria would now, in a very traditional generation, an older generation, she would now add on viuda, which means widow. And the abbreviation would be VDA period. So if you do see it, usually it would be more with the elderly patient population. But again, times are changing. And it would be Maria Ana Lara, viuda de Gómez, widow of Gómez. And as a side note, she would have to legally sign off that way in all documents in Latin America. Again, times are changing, especially more here in the US. Okay, we're wrapping up with utilizing interpreter service effectively. So it's so important to provide the interpreter context and your expectations of the visit. So even if it's just one quick minute to let the interpreter know, this is just a follow-up, the results, they're all good, or this is a more serious sensitive conversation I need to have, because it allows your interpreter to set the tone. Remember, tone of voice matters. We're saying a lot based on our tone of voice. Be mindful of cultural nuances like eye contact, smiling, proximity, touch, and acknowledging others in the room. Don't just direct everything to the patient. Also the family members, when the interpreter is speaking, I know it can be easy to just want to turn to your computer really quick and get some notes in there. But try to maintain the eye contact and just acknowledging and being actively involved, because otherwise we're just going to connect with the interpreter and then you just get locked out of that interaction. You want to be able to continue that rapport with your patient. Choose correct and formal speech. So try to avoid slang and colloquialisms. It's extra work for your interpreter. Again, there's 20 Spanish-speaking countries plus the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. So there's a lot of different equivalents that we'd have to try to come up with. Examples would be like, do you feel under the weather or blue, or do you feel like an elephant is sitting on your chest? Just directly. Do you have pain in your chest? Do you feel pressure in your chest? So again, make it easy for the interpreter. Use complete and concise sentences. In English, it's not a problem. We can drop things to be efficient. Like instead of asking, do you have any other symptoms? Often it's any other symptoms. That is a problem in the Spanish language because we need the verb to determine who we're asking, in what tense is it, in the past, in the present, in the future. So we need to try to make it easier for our interpreters, because it's not a complete sentence. We don't know what you're trying to ask. So be mindful of that, please, even though it's not an issue or concern in English. In the Spanish language, we do need it, especially if we're only Spanish speakers. It's very different if we're bilingual, because I know I might have many bilingual friends and colleagues here that say, oh, no, well, I get it. But remember, if we don't speak any English, it's important to know. Speak directly to your patient, so we don't feel like we're being left out. Try to speak some Spanish. We talked about some of those courtesy phrases. And I'm now going to wrap up with some of the examples of the fotonovelas, which you will see says a lot without even having to read it. Images are able to really convey the same information. And I will share this with you as we wrap up. And that way it is available for everyone, regardless of literacy level. So now I want to open up to any questions. I know I went over by a couple of minutes, and I know everyone needs to get back to their days, but I do want to thank everyone for joining in. And I do want to emphasize again, I don't mean to generalize all Latinos, but again, I want to give you a glimpse of what that traditional Latino culture is like compared to the non-Latino culture. So thank you all for joining in. I will open up for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rios. I know in the Q&A, 2 questions popped up, and we had one attendee raise their hand. It looks like the first question, when approaching cultural sensitivities, familismo, fatalismo, etc., and wanting to show awareness, humility, should we use these terms along with our personal touch, or is it better to simply honor the meanings of the terms without referencing them?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much for asking. And that is actually wonderful. I feel like it's better to just in actions demonstrate. So not necessarily point them out, because for many Latinos, we might not really know that. So it's really just acting based on that without having to really name them. So much is conveyed through actions. So thank you so much for asking that. That's a wonderful question. And, even if because I know, again, we can't generalize all, but chances are, if we're born and raised in Latin America, a lot of these are the values that we really do appreciate and value very much. Anyone else want to join in with questions or comments?
Looks like we had another question on the topic of fatalismo, specifically that it's God's will, level of acceptance to chronic illnesses. What are the tips to approach a patient to consider medical care?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah, it cut out on my end. I apologize. Could you repeat that, please?
No problem. From Christina Perez, we had on the topic of fatalismo, specifically that it's God's will, level of acceptance to chronic illnesses. What are tips to approach a patient to consider medical care?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that, because it is such a sensitive topic to address, because we do not want to discount. And the reality is, in a very, very traditional Latino culture, the Spanish conquests and the Catholic religion are rooted. I mean, that is just part of the culture, so built in. So that said, I definitely would encourage at least acknowledging that, understanding that view, that perspective, being respectful of it, and then asking that permission if it's okay. I would love to share some options of what we've just recently discovered and actually has been helpful to so many of our patients. So again, framing it that way, so you want to at least acknowledge the fatalismo, right? But then with permission, asking, again, by name, Senora Gomez, if it's okay with you, I would love this opportunity to share some of the suggestions or recommendations that I give all my patients that we actually have realized recently really does help. Recently, even if recently we know it's been decades, it's been quite some time, but it's a nice way to ease into the conversation without discarding or discrediting maybe what the abuelita has been saying, or their own doctor in Mexico or El Salvador that they've been seeing. So again, it's a nice way to just kind of ease into that conversation. But thank you so much for asking. That's a great question. Such an important area to focus in on.
Great. Thank you so much for that thoughtful answer. I'm not sure if Joseph Greco is still here, but he did raise his hand at some point during the presentation. I I know it's sort of the end of the presentation, so I may have left, but any other questions that we can answer? I did see one other in the chat. Are we able to get a copy of the PowerPoint? There will be a copy sent out in the next 7 to 10 days in the email, so you should have a copy of that. Right, and I'm not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Rios, for such a wonderful and informative presentation. Really appreciate, and everyone's interaction and questions was fantastic.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. It truly was an honor and pleasure. Muchas gracias. Thank you.